Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. My name is George Binns, and I'm here with my co-host, Gail Burke. This was originally supposed to be one of these Fox News light shows where we do the 5 minus 2, but we're only just the two of us tonight because our co-host, Elliot, couldn't make it. And the issue I think I'd like to start off with tonight is talking about is how the media has been trivializing a really serious problem. And basically what it comes down to is there's about 60 million people who are now displaced persons in the world. And I'm using the old World War II kind of terminology because that's the last time we had this many refugees in the world without a place to go. And what makes it unnerving to me is there was an article in today's Salem News, letter to the editor. Today is Veterans Day, by the way, and happy Veterans Day to all of you, belated by the time you see the show. The title of the article is Immigration and the Meaning of Hospitality by Michael Duda, and he's a minister in Wenham. And he goes through a litany of how all the religions in the world have some sort of code that says you need to take care of the stranger, which is fine. And he goes through the list all the way from the Jewish mitzvah to the parable of the Good Samaritan. And that sounds good. The problem I have with this thing, when he gets to the end of the article, he starts talking about how the immigrants moved into the United States and displaced the Native Americans rather nastily. And I think we all recognize that kind of history. And from that, he draws the conclusion that we're all illegal immigrants because we just came here without proper authority. And I have a problem with that kind of thinking because basically the first real immigration laws weren't passed until 1865. So up until then, anybody that showed up was allowed in, and they were all, quote, legal because there was no law to be against. And the implications are that we get into a situation where we need to be very nice to all these illegals because we're illegals ourselves, which really isn't true. And one of the problems that I don't think they recognize is there are real serious difficulties bringing in a tremendous amount of people. And this is one of the things that I think gets totally lost in the press.
I agree. I think particularly when you bring in large amounts of people all at the same time, that's when we really run into trouble.
Yeah. And the other thing that bothers me about the way the press handles some of these things is about 6 weeks ago, there was a very tragic incident where a boy was found drowned, washed up on the beach in, I think it was Greece or one of the islands over there. And it made the headlines in just about every paper, and there were some really tragic pictures that were going around for a couple of days, and then it died. And then 3 days ago, I think it was, or 2 days ago, another ship full of migrants capsized, about 17 people drowned, a bunch of kids. You don't see anything on it. It's no longer news. And it may sound cynical, but I started to think that maybe Stalin had the right idea that one death is a tragedy. Multiple deaths, that's a statistic. And it doesn't sell papers, so therefore people don't get the feeling that, hey, this is an ongoing problem. It disappeared last week and we haven't heard about it since. And the irritating part about it is, what's the big news this week? Well, Barack Obama finally killed the Keystone Pipeline. Oh, okay, that's interesting. But what doesn't make the press is between 2008 and 2013, 2008 is significant because that's when the pipeline was first proposed. There's been something like 55,000 miles of pipeline constructed in this country. And all of a sudden, what's so special about the Keystone Pipeline that it's got to be killed? Again, people probably think I'm a little cynical. I don't think I'm that positive. But basically, they're coming down to an issue that he has got to make some sort of peace with his base. So he throws them a bone. We'll kill the pipeline. And there's no real reason for it, considering the number of pipelines that have been built. And we've got the issue going on over in Peabody and Danvers, and they're trying to bring a gas line in from New York. And at the same time, everybody's saying, well, we need to get rid of all these coal-fired plants and bring in more gas. But as soon as you try to bring in the gas, well, don't bring it through my backyard.
Well, and look at how the Keystone Pipeline would eliminate the need for transporting the fuel by train or by truck. And who owns the trains?
Oh, yeah.
Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
My old friend Warren Buffett.
Yeah, so there's been that conspiracy theory going around that the reason it was hung up is because Buffett is a very strong contributor to Obama and the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. And there's enough going around about the amount of contributions, and although Brian Watson came up with an article a couple of weeks back that basically I wasn't totally enthusiastic about, but at the same time we did recognize that there's an awful lot of money sloshing around in these political campaigns on both sides. And my complaint with him and Robert Rice, the book he was quoting from, is they always talk about the Republicans and how much money they're getting and who's supporting them. And they never mention, oh, by the way, besides the Koch brothers donating to the Republicans, there's George Soros and all the liberals in Hollywood that the Democrats love to cozy up to. So it gets to be a one-sided discussion. And again, I don't think people can understand what the problem is until you got all the bits and pieces laid out for you.
And you have to connect the dots.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the children and you have one child die and it's a tragedy, and you have 17 die and it makes the newspaper for a day or two, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm really, really beginning to believe that we do not treat our children very well, whether it be in the schools or beyond. And the reason I say that is because of what is happening in the colleges. And especially recently, over in Boston the other day, students protesting, I'm not even sure what they were protesting, but they managed to shut down the Green Line. And I don't think these students even know what's going on. From day one, kids are taught that whatever they say, whatever they do, it's fine. Aren't they wonderful? Then they get into school and they're not allowed to fail because we wouldn't want to damage their self-esteem. So you carry that through middle school, through high school, and then these kids get into college, and they want what they want when they want it. They've also been taught that whatever they don't get, and particularly if you're a minority, that you are a victim. Well, victims? How do these children, some of whom have had very nice lives, become victims? Well, they can't take any kind of criticism. And any time anything is said, any criticism at all, it's the person doing it is either racist, homophobic, or just a rotten person. So what is happening on this in the colleges now, what happened in Michigan, was it Michigan?
Yeah.
No, Missouri.
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 Yeah.
The University of Missouri, which is predominantly white, but apparently some black students were, particularly one black student, was complaining about some racial epithets he thought were hurled at him. And so he decided to go on a hunger strike. And then he got the football team at the university to protest. And they said, well, the president of the university has been very lackadaisical in addressing these kinds of issues. So we're not going to attend practices or games. until he is fired. Well, they caved in. The president resigned, and that wasn't even good enough. They wanted him to handwrite an apology. Then they started on the chancellor of the university. He was also either fired or resigned.
Yeah, he resigned too, yeah.
So now you have these kids, these protesters. We are not sure who all the protesters were. Were they really all students? We don't know. But they set up camps on the university grounds, and they wouldn't let the press in.
Oh, yeah. That got to be very interesting.
So what happens to freedom of speech? Well, apparently in many university campuses today, freedom of speech only applies if you agree with whatever the protesters or the leaders of the students decide is politically correct. And this is the university where, when that incident in Ferguson, Missouri, where the black student was shot, the black thug, I should say, was shot by a white policeman, and we all remember hands up, don't shoot, which never happens. Some of the students protested that they were too traumatized by the incident to take their exam, so they wanted to have their exam delayed. And the university said, okay. So these kids cannot take anything. They're so sensitive. And then we have at another university, Yale.
Yeah, with the Halloween costumes.
The Halloween costumes, well, we have to start banning.
Correct.
Yeah, we have to start banning certain costumes because someone might be offended. Were there any people offended? Who knows? But we can't do it if someone even might be offended. So they banned certain costumes. I mean, it's insane what's happening.
Yeah.
These kids are so sensitive that any kind of anything, a word, a look, a cartoon, offends them. How are they going to cope when they get out into the world?
Well, it's going to be a different world when they get there, and they're going to be in for a shock. And I sent you an email today, and I guess it's time to drag that one out. There's a professor by the name of Mike Adams. He's a criminology professor at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. And he walked into his class one day, and he started on, this is the way the real world is. And he goes on at great length about what he sees happening in the schools along the same line. The interesting part about it, he says, I got 3 fixes for the problem. First of all, get out of my class. You can fill out the drop sheet at the James Hall, and don't believe that diversity, and you don't want to be surrounded by people who agree with your twisted interpretation of the Constitution. This is what started him off when somebody started saying that the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence was unconstitutional. That's a hell of a way to start. Second, he says, withdraw from the university. If you find you are actually relieved because you no longer will be in a class where your beliefs might be challenged, then you aren't ready for college. Go get a job building houses so you can work with some illegal aliens who will help you gain a better appreciation of what this country has to offer. And finally, it says, if this doesn't work, then you should simply ask to get the hell out of the country. He's had some rough times over it, and he just filed a lawsuit, and I think he won it, that he was denied a promotion because of his very conservative attitude and position. And again, it's a situation where the liberals that take over the college have a very narrow view of what's going on, and as a result, anybody who disagrees with them can't possibly have any bright thoughts at all worth listening to. They're just plain wrong, and got to get rid of them. And the lady you were talking about at the University of Missouri, that having a protest and the cameras showed up, and she was seen calling for, get some muscle over here to get rid of these guys. And she was part of the journalism school. Well, she isn't anymore. That got fixed today. But it's just unbelievable, some of these attitudes they come up with.
Well, the interesting thing, I think, is that the chancellor and the president are liberals who have been promoting this kind of thing, and now the kids have turned on him.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
They're going to turn on the teachers as well.
It's like Berkeley in the 60s, where the sit-ins were going through all the colleges, and then you get the other sit-ins of the Wall Street tribe.
Oh, the protesters, yeah.
And one of the things that I always remember, there was an interest, this is back in the 60s when they were having those protests, there was a film clip going around on TV, and it was a group of, I guess you call them hippies in those days, kind of characters. And there was one young lady who was complaining that people shouldn't have to work. What we should do is take the GDP and divide it up to everybody, and we all got money and we don't have to work. You know,
Great idea.
You know, and there she's in college, and this is the way they're thinking. You wonder, what kind of a degree is she going to get? And how did she get there? You know, GDP, very simply, is the sum total of all the work that's been done in the country. And if you don't, nobody's working, there's no GDP. It just boggles the mind.
What's scary, too, is that a lot of these liberal politicians are pandering to these kids and telling them, we're going to give you everything for free. You're going to get free college tuition. And these kids don't even have the sense to ask, but who pays for it? Somebody has to pay for it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's the government. Well, who's the government? It's your mother, it's your father, it's your grandparents, it's your brothers and sisters, and it's you.
Well, the other part of the thing is that they always come up with this, well, we're going to raise taxes on the rich, or every time something's wrong, the rich got all the tax breaks. And when you start to go through the arithmetic, the rich, by person, are very rich. Some of them are absolutely filthy rich. But when you add them all together, there isn't that much money there.
No.
The big group of money is between the people who are making $50,000 a year and making $500,000 a year. That's where the money is. From $500,000 on up to the 0.1% of the 1%ers, yeah, but they're only making about half the money of this middle class group is. So really, when they're saying we're going to tax the rich, they're going to find out that, oh, geez, we didn't get enough money out of them. We'll move that tax bracket down.
Yeah.
And you can remember the 70s and 80s, there was this creeping bracket problem with the taxes, where they would fix the bracket and they would jack up the inflation rate so they pushed you into a higher bracket. That's going to come back again. This is the funny money philosophy that they get caught in. The other thing that bothers me about it is the liberal press right now seems to be in a mood of, we've got to support our candidate, which happens to be Hillary this week. Mm-hmm. And as a result, they think that, well, we'll just attack Trump, and that'll make everything go away. Now, Trump is an interesting character. I would have my doubts about him running the country, but at the same time, you got to give the guy credit because he is saying very specific, positive things. He's not giving you a wishy-washy, well, I think we ought to, maybe next time, kind of thing. And they got all over him for his comments about, well, we ought to put a fence up across the southern border, and we get Mexico to pay for it. Hey, it's a place to start for a negotiation from. It probably never happened. But at the same time, you don't hear any hue and cry anything like what Trump is catching when they say, oh, the Europeans are noticing that, well, there's a lot more people coming out of the Middle East and coming out of Africa than they originally planned. They're starting to putting up fences, and they're starting to run into real problems. Oh, do you think we might have the same problem?
Did you see Donald Trump on Saturday Night Live?
No.
There was one skit that had the Mexican president coming in to visit Donald Trump. And he said, Donald, here's the check for the wall. And Donald said, well, thank you very much. Well, wait a minute now, that's too much. We don't need all that. No, you deserve it. You get it.
Yeah.
I thought that was a riot.
And I think the other part of the thing is, what he specifically said was he wanted to stop the illegals from coming in because it's not fair that people have been standing in line trying to get legal entry into this country, and he wanted to stop the criminal element. And everybody poo-pooed that as always anti-Hispanic. Yesterday on TV, there was an interview with the governor of North Carolina, and they got talking with him about different problems, and one of the things he says, the cartels are running through my state.
I saw that.
And what are they doing? Well, they're smuggling drugs and people through North Carolina because that's on the main route between the South and the big cities in the North. And I've seen a couple of articles written that when the cartels get into one of these shootouts, it's really a turf war because they're fighting for access points to get into this country, and somebody else has got it, so they're trying to take it away. Once they sort this out south of the border, then they're going to start moving into this country because they're in the business of marketing drugs.
Yep. Yes, they are.
And they will start turf wars with the gangs around here right now that are also marketing drugs.
Well, a lot of people think that it's not going to happen here. Well, it is going to happen here. The people down on the border in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico have been having this problem for years. And unfortunately, we have a president that doesn't believe in enforcing our laws. As a matter of fact, there was a police chief in, I forget the name of the city, who quite outlandishly told the cameras, the reporters that she was speaking with, I will not enforce the laws.
Yeah.
Well, when you get that kind of an attitude, and you have the president backing it up, the officers down on that are in Texas and in Arizona are having a tough time because they're told, do not enforce the immigration laws.
Well, you start to look at the crime rates, and they've been coming down for a number of years. All of a sudden, they're going back up
That's
again.
Right.
And I've seen articles written where police say, hey, as soon as you step out of a patrol car, there's a camera in your face, and another cell phone here, and another one over there. Every move they make is being recorded, not because somebody says, hey, you're doing a great job, I want to catch you, I want to get you.
That's right.
And it's
And look at the police officers that have been shot
Yeah.
while sitting in their patrol cars.
Oh, yeah.
And you hear about that for a day or two, and then that goes by the boards.
Well, there is, got to admit, there are some real problems in this world.
Sure.
And I think I've mentioned before in our Monday morning get-together, the book by Matt Taibbi, and he goes through the traumas of living in the low-rent district. And it doesn't make any difference what color you are, sky blue, pink, and purple polka dots. You're living in the low-rent district, you're going to get a lot of police involvement. And sometimes it's justified, and other times it's not. The case in this past week where a boy was coming home, walking through an alley, and he got shot, 9-year-old kid. He got assassinated. And even the gang leaders are saying, wait a minute, how could that happen? And unless you have, a lot of coverage in some of these areas, this is what's going to happen. There's always some nut loose that's going to cause a problem. And it's just something that people have got to recognize that, yes, there could be a problem with the priests. There probably is. There's been enough stuff going on. But at the same time, you still have to have some sort of protection. You got to do something about it. And this is a situation where you got to go through and says, okay, who are the good cops, who are the bad cops? And protect the good cops and take care of the bad ones, get them out of there. And you end up with the other classic is similar situation with the teachers in New York City, and the teachers that can't teach anymore, they end up in the rubber rooms.
Rubber rooms, yeah.
I mean, there are some places that there are problems, and you got to do something about them, not just paper them over or Band-Aids over them.
Well, in New York, they especially have a problem because the mayor of New York is a real liberal, and he does not have the support of the police at all because he does not stand up for them. He doesn't protect them.
Oh,
And he passes law. Well, I don't know if he passes the laws, but he instigates things so that the police are not protected. And if they don't even have their boss on their side, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
They have the unions, but it's not the same as having your boss on your side.
Yeah. And the other part of this problem, I think, is that the situation with the immigrants is something that has just been growing and growing.
Yeah.
And the situation and how we got into it with Afghanistan and Iraq, that's going to be debated forever. To my simple ways is we won the war, we lost the peace.
Well, I think that a big part of the problem is when these immigrants come in, we don't know who they are.
Well, I think the problem is even deeper than that, is that when we essentially took out Saddam Hussein and got rid of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and we tried to set up a government there that mirrors what we do. And you find out that these tribal areas and these very sectarian religious groups are not compatible with what we have as a representative capitalism. They just don't work together. They can't assimilate that.
Well, the problem is when they come here, they don't want to assimilate either. They carry what they've been brought up with. They don't want to abide by our laws. They don't want to abide by their customs. And they've created many, many problems, particularly the Muslims.
Well, that gets to be another interesting thing. In the mayor of Irving, Texas, what's her name? Beth Van Dyne, shut down the Sharia court they had in town. And this is a group of Muslims who got together and said, okay, we're not going to abide by the laws of this particular state and town. We're going to set up our own. They had their own Sharia lawyers who were not licensed or had passed the bar or anything. And they were trying to do their own thing. And you get into a situation like that and, wait a minute, what happens if you're not a Muslim and you run afoul of the Muslim? What court do you go to?
Well, that's what's happening in Dearborn, Michigan.
Yeah.
They have Sharia courts, too.
And the question comes down to is, if the Sharia court passes judgment on you, and they say, okay, we're going to execute the judgment, what's the city going to do? What's the state going to do? Are they going to stand up to these guys and tell them, hey, wait a minute,
Well,
not here, not in this country?
As we've seen in other areas, they may not stand up to them. And these in several communities, the Muslims are being elected to the city councils, to the school committee, and they're making
Yeah, that
decisions.
was what, Hamtramck? Hamtramck, Michigan.
Yep. Yep.
Now, they got into a discussion with our friend Gary on that one this morning. And what it turns out, the town is 50% Polish and 50% Muslim. Okay. And the way these four guys got elected, or four people got elected, was that the Muslims were much more effective than the Polish in getting out the vote.
George, I'm getting the signal that our show is almost up. So,
But I got 3 more pages. No.
so do I.
But
We'll
again,
have to do this again.
Okay, a good way to finish this thing, I think, is to recognize that if you take the system for granted, all it takes is somebody who's a little more ambitious and a little more aggressive than you are
That's right.
to get out the vote. Of course, this is a week late for that kind of a pitch, but,
Well, yeah, but it's certainly valid.
it's coming up again
It will. Yep.
in next November, and that this can happen to us anytime. And
Oh, yeah. And it will.
You've got to stay involved, and the kind of information we get is not conducive to making intelligent votes.
And that's why we do this show, to inform the people. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back soon with another edition of What's Happening. Good night.